Hello, everybody. It's time for another match preview. It's match preview time. Corey alongside you for this one as we take a look at Derby County's next game, which is against Oxford United. Joining me to talk all things Oxford and to give us the lowdown on the U's is Liam Rice. He's the Oxford United reporter for the Oxford Mail. Liam, great to have you back on. It's been a while, but great to see you again. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Pleasure to be here once again. It's also good to see Oxford United and Derby have sort of remained friends and continued their journey together into the championship. So we're able to keep doing this.
For sure. And I always have a soft spot for Oxford, Liam, because I had a lucky enough opportunity visiting Oxford about 10, 12 years ago now, and I was able to get a tour of the Kassam. So really enjoying seeing the U-shaped stadium and everything like that. But I always had a soft spot for Oxford, and that was at the point where I think it was they were really on the rise from League Two, and they were kind of on that thing. And I forget the name of the manager at the time because managers come and go. But it's good to see them back up in the championship and everything like that. Talk to me, Liam, about Oxford United at the time of recording, which is obviously before the West Brom game, because of schedules and midweek fixtures and life and work and things like that. Oxford's 10th in the table. Is the general mood, are you happy with 10th in the table? Is that fair? Are Oxford punching above their weight right now? And generally, have you been happy overall with the start to the season?
Delighted with the start of the season. I think if you go back to maybe the beginning before a ball was kicked in pre-season, all the sort of the bookmakers and the pundits and the experts and the writers get their crystal balls out, and I think Oxford United were in most people's bottom three. To be brutal about it, and to be honest, to be expected as well, because they were a newly promoted team playing in the second tier for the first time in 25 years. So those predictions, you couldn't really, from the outside, you couldn't fault them, but they have. Well, they've said to themselves, well, let's prove those people wrong, really. And the start of the season it's been remarkable. It's been very good. We know the difference between League One and the Championship. There is a huge gulf to make up for an early promoted team, but they've settled into Championship life very well, and they've shown sort of a different way of playing from game to game, whether that be going at teams, especially at home. And on the road in away games, perhaps been a little bit more standoff, a little bit more cautious. And it's at home where they've picked up a lot of, the majority of their points, really. They've only dropped 2, and that was at home to Burnley in a goalless draw. So they've won their other games. Like I say, as of recording now, before the West Brom game on Saturday. So yeah, I mean, it really has been a dream start, and that's no exaggeration, because, like you say, they are top 10 in the Championship, and from the outside, punching above their weight.
Let's add a little real, if I may, Liam, take a little bit of air out of the balloon. Is this where are Oxford right now? You covered them for years, right? The fan base, yourself, are you expecting them to be in and around this position come the end of the season, or is inevitably they'll avoid relegation but drop a little bit?
I think there will be, I've said this, I think there will be times this season where they will have worse runs of form than this. There's no doubt about it. They may lose 3, 4, 5 games on the bounce at some point this season. It will happen. There's even the most sort of positive Oxford United fan or whatever would sort of say that. But I also think they'll have better runs of form than this. I think they can quite easily at this level go on and win 3, 4, 5 games on the bounce. So there'll be the Championship's a roller coaster. There'll be ups, downs, all sorts of different angles throughout the season. But yeah, I mean, if they finished where they are now at the end of the campaign, I mean, that would be incredible. That would be momentous for the club. But I think there's an expectation that naturally, as the season goes on, they'll probably drop down a little bit. As of right now, I hand on heart sort of can't see them getting dragged into a relegation battle. I think my initial sort of forecast, my initial prediction before a ball was kicked for this season I think I said something like 17th or 18th, and that sort of drew not like a mixed response, but I think a few people thought that was quite optimistic. But like you've just said, I sort of see what's going on. I'm there home and away every game. I sort of see a little bit more behind the scenes than your average person, perhaps. The training ground, etc. And there's a real unity. There's a real sort of camaraderie and togetherness at the club, and that's sort of when if players are in and out of the team, etc. So I think come the end of the season, lower mid-table would probably be where they'll settle. But while we're on this sort of ride, it's been said before, why not just keep aiming high and keep aiming for those stars almost?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you, and I think it's important for Oxford as well, probably to not get drawn into the fact that they're 10th, because it's very easy, Liam, I think, when you go into January and you're like, hey, we're 9th and 10th of the league, we got a shot here. And that's sometimes where problems can come. You spend, I know the budgets are not as big as some other teams, and that's not a disrespect to Oxford, because Derby's, there's no budget and then there's Derby's budget. So I'm well aware of budgets, but sometimes you can get sucked into your kind of own, like, hey, we're 10th, we could make a run here. And then you go up and it's difficult and things like that. So I think it's really important to keep all that kind of stuff in expectation. And it's really good to hear about the camaraderie. And I was also going to point out Oxford's home form is great. So is Derby's home form. So we're kind of very mirror images of each other because we're not too far behind you in the table. But to talk about the camaraderie and the elements, the thing that I found it interesting was the way they can win different ways. They can play different systems. They can kind of attack you in different ways, home and away, slightly different. So talk to me a little bit about the manager, Des Buckingham, because I saw him get appointed last winter. I was kind of like, who? What the hell? He came from Mumbai City in Indian football, and that has its own connotations, as you're well aware, right? And he's kind of had not a strange, but a different coaching path than those traditionally that a lot of coaching in the EFL pyramid. Wellington Phoenix, New Zealand youth teams, caretaker part of New Zealand, goes to Indian football in Mumbai City. He's there for a couple of years, and then boom, Oxford come calling. And I know he was a former Oxford player, but talk to me a little bit about the job Des Buckingham has done since coming on as the Oxford head coach, I guess, or manager. Head coach.
Yeah, it's the way now is everyone's a head coach these days. I can't remember the last time I heard someone referred to as a manager. I think with Des Buckingham though, I mean, they're one day there's a Netflix documentary in this. I think there's someone's going to get it at whether it be Amazon, Netflix, you name it, because he's like you say, his rise and his and just how things panned out is incredible. It's remarkable. I'll sort of give you a shortened history, I guess, of it, but like you say, yeah, he left Oxford in his sort of late 20s. He was sort of coaching with the first team here for a few months with Chris Wilder. Went off on his globe-trotting adventures, which saw him go to, like you say, Australia, New Zealand, India. Very brief spell back in this country with Stoke City's under 23s, I think it was. And then, yeah, all these jobs abroad. Most of them were with the City Football Group, who, as we know, sort of own Man City, and that's their sort of flagship team. And then there are others across the world. But it was his success with Mumbai where, it wasn't necessarily the fact that he won league titles there, but also it was the manner of the way they were winning. They were winning by breaking all sorts of goal scoring records, for goals scored, shots in games, how many points, how many goals conceded. They were playing a brand of football which reflected, I'm not saying it was like Manchester City, but it reflected what the City Football Group want from their sort of head coaches and bosses around the world. So there'd been a couple of, I think, sniffs from teams in England before he came to Oxford, but then naturally when a guy who was brought up and lived as a kid basically around the corner from where the current training ground is, that's an opportunity that's so hard to turn down. He comes here to replace a manager who'd got them second in the league and gone up to the division above with Bristol City, but yeah, things didn't get off to the start that he'd wanted. Sort of a couple of months into the season, it took a while to get form, to get momentum, and then it took a 5-0 battering away at Bolton Wanderers for things to then sort of fall into place. I think that was the game that has said, well, let's use this now as a fresh slate, it's a restart. We're gonna because before then he'd kind of tried to keep what Liam Manning, the previous head coach, had done, and tried to keep those ideas, those sort of tactics, those sort of things. And he said, well, naturally, now I'm stamping my authority on things. And from then on, they went on a wonderful run at the end of last season. And as we all know, they got promoted at Wembley in style in the playoff final against Bolton Wanderers, the team that beat them 5-0 just a few months earlier. So, and then obviously since, it's continued because they're now sort of flying in the Championship. And, he, at 39 years old, is one of these sort of modern young head coaches who it's impossible to really know what his ceiling is. He could be, are we talking someone who could be, could manage in the Premier League or a top flight division somewhere in Europe or abroad quite easily. He really impresses me, and he's a real gem for Oxford United.
It seems like Oxford's kind of got a bit of the momentum back because I remember the manager's name, Carl Robinson, was at Oxford about 10 years ago, and that's when they had the upswing, and then Appleton came in. It kind of went pear-shaped and kind of lagged in League One for a while. Felt like a bit of that trajectory on the upward swing that Oxford were on is kind of, was dispelled, and it's glad to see now that Buckingham has come in and trying to bring that momentum back a little bit. We're going to talk about a player in a minute, Liam, who I'm very interested in, but who are the star players? Who are the standout players in this Oxford team that Derby need to really watch out for midweek?
Yeah, I suppose back to front, Jamie Cumming in goal is he was signed from Chelsea initially on loan last January. It took him, by even his own admission, a couple of months to get up to speed. He'd been sort of sat basically not even in the Chelsea squad, as you can imagine. They've got about 20 goalkeepers on their books, so he needed time to sort of get back to playing again. And then towards the back end of last season, he was the hero in the playoff second leg with an outstanding save in stoppage time that ensured that they got through 2-1 to the final. And then this season, every game now, he's making at least one good save, if not one very good save per game. And he's starting to look really at home in the Championship. So I think I'd have to give him a shout there for the goalkeeper. Defensively wise, Elliot Moore is the kind of, he's the captain at the back. You notice that if he's not playing for whatever reason, whether it be a knock or an injury, they do miss his presence at the back and his ability to sort of bring the ball out from the back as the modern ball playing centre backs do these days. And then the two, if I was to pick two, maybe final third players, Mark Harris, you can't go unnoticed. 4 goals in 4 games at the beginning of the season. He's been recalled to the Wales team now, played 90 minutes in their win just this week. And he, even when he's not scoring, it's everything else about his game. He works tremendously hard up front with the press, and he will, harass and sort of get at defenders for 90 minutes. He will not stop, and that allows Oxford to win the ball high up the pitch, and then basically they can carve out opportunities, chances, and create, from the final third. But I think the one who is the real sort of star, and the one who Derby fans will be sort of familiar with over the last couple of years, though, is Tyler Goodrum. He's sensational. I mean, he's only 21, and maybe, like I said with Des, you don't really know what his ceiling might be just because of how good he is now. He was initially a winger, and played on the right or on the left. Des Buckingham sort of moved him into a midfield position at the toward the end of last season, and he sort of excelled in there because his ability to similar to Harris to get at players, to sort of swamp around and sort of he buzzes around the pitch with this low centre of gravity. It's amazing, but also from the midfield role, he's able to sort of get shots off from outside the box. He's got a wonderful right foot, and he can find the net from range. And he just looks, the all-round sort of player. Really, he, I think there's the thing here that he's the Oxford Messi because of the short stature and thing, and they have a very similar style, and he probably won't be a Lionel Messi, but he's it's a relatively close comparison, I guess, without the goals. But they're the four for me. Who, if any one of them is missing, if they're not in the team sheet for whatever reason, you might sort of go, oh, that could be a little bit of a blow.
It's a good thing. Everybody, anytime you get a short player now, Liam, if you notice, they always call him, something Messi. And I'm trying to wonder, like, what do they have for a very average height guy, very unathletic, who plays football? Okay, like, what are they going to call me when I show up? Like, like, other than like left back on the bench or shouldn't be playing, like, there's no comparison for us average height guys, like you can compare us to. But I feel like short people have it made because they can always be compared to Lionel Messi. Talk to me about Louie Sibley, Liam. Had a long career at Derby, decided he wasn't going to renew his contract, and then rolls up at Oxford. Talk to me about Louie Sibley and how that Derby Academy product's doing right now, and are we going to see Louie midweek?
He's been in the same sort of box as, I guess, as quite a lot of the summer signings. Oxford had a really busy summer, 16, 17 players eventually coming through the door, and initially, so far, Des Buckingham has basically sort of placed a lot of the trust in those that got them here. So I think, take the first day of the season, 9 out of the 11 who started were 9 of the 11 who started at Wembley. So Sibley's not alone in this, where he's a new signing who's certainly not played as much football as he'd have liked. Let's put it that way. He's had to be patient. He's had to sort of play in the Carabao Cup games. He has had a little bit of time off the bench, but in the final game before the international break at Portsmouth, he came on and scored within a couple of minutes. Something that Derby fans will have probably become accustomed to, him sort of getting the ball sort of maybe 35, 40 yards out and then just driving forwards that sort of 10 yards or so, and then sort of getting a shot off from outside the box and finding the bottom corner. So he did himself absolutely no harm with that. He looked very good as well. He even made a goal line clearance at the other end at Fratton Park. So bit of activity at both ends for him. And I think with maybe the injuries they've got in midfield, Cameron Brannigan, you'll have noticed I didn't mention in my players to watch. He would always be there, but he is out with a knee injury, so it kind of opens a door for Sibley a little bit. There are, of course, other options, and that's part and parcel of being a Championship club now. As I'm sure the case was at Derby. It wasn't always going to be a starting player week in, week out. But I was excited when they signed him because of what he'd done at Derby, the experience he had for someone at 23 years old, playing in the Championship and League One. His versatility as well. He can sort of play a few different roles in the team. So yeah, I was excited when he signed, and I think there will be more to come from Louie Sibley throughout the season. But right now, yeah, he probably hasn't played as much as he'd have liked. But like I said, that's kind of that's where you've got to earn your book again, I guess, really.
Yeah, and it must be difficult for him after having been in Derby for so long. He has to move to Oxford, get readjusted to kind of a new living situation and things like that. They're coming in with a team that got promoted through the playoffs. Manager trusts those players. So hopefully more to come, because Louie was such a busy player for Derby and has so much talent. It was just, he could never get that consistent spell of games where it'd be like 10, 15, even 20 games in a row where you like put him in there and you're like, this guy's just going to perform. We saw it in fits and starts, and like, there is way more to this player. But then he'd play for a couple games and it'd get a bit weird and he would disappear for a couple of games and get on. And it's difficult to get in that kind of rhythm. Liam, talk to me about for the game on Tuesday, Oxford at home. Obviously, they have that great home form. How do you expect them tactically to line up, and where can they really get it? What are the strengths of this team?
Well, at home so far, possibly aside from the Burnley game where they did sort of park the bus, as it were, and sort of played a little bit more. I think a low block, is that the sort of the favoured term these days? That's one of the popular phrases. So yeah. Apart from that one, they have been quite on the front foot and quite aggressive at home. That was none more so than Norwich on the opening day, where their press and how they pushed high up the pitch in the final third was sensational. But I think, yeah, they're a bit more front-footed at home than they are away. So I think they'll try and take the game to Derby. Obviously, a lot may hinge on how the West Brom sort of game goes as well on Saturday, which again is at home. But I think they'll pay respect to Derby because ultimately they know, like Portsmouth before the international break, they are one of the two teams there where they do know more about them than they do the Championship teams. So, having sort of played with them in League One for a few seasons, so I think there'll be it won't be all out attack. It won't. I don't think it'll be that, but they'll take the game to Derby, and then I guess it then becomes maybe Derby will perhaps plan the counter. That might be how it falls out. We'll see. But ultimately, it's sort of it's possession football, but not possession for the sake of it. They'll try to get the ball forward, at the earliest opportunity. It won't be, incessantly keeping it just for keeping it sort of sake. So they can mix it up though. They can sort of go with balls sort of over the top or around the side of sort of centre halves in between the fullback. It's not they can go a lot sort of more direct route as you were if they want. It's not all about sort of tippy tappy short sort of passes. I think like the Portsmouth game before the international break, it'll be a good measure to see how far both sides have come really and developed in their sort of time in the Championship so far.
Yeah, it looks a really intriguing game with both teams kind of in that middle table. And I think, it's safe to say, Liam, I have the same feelings about Derby's start to the season as you do about Oxford. Like, I'm absolutely delighted. I couldn't be happier. As long as both of our clubs finish above that dotted line, that's all really that matters for this season for both of our respective clubs. But really happy with the start. And before I let you go, Liam, two more things. Where are the weaknesses in this Derby team? Where are the weaknesses in this Oxford team? Where can Derby really hit Oxford and hurt them at the Kassam?
Weaknesses is a funny one really because I guess if it's anything, it's maybe the closing sort of stages of games. There've been a couple of times where more so away. In fact, I think all on the road, all away games. They have sort of found sometimes the last 10, 15, 20 minutes of games, they can either maybe switch off a little bit mentally, or whether it's fatigue, whether it's the sort of the demands of the Championship compared to League One. And they have conceded a few goals that way, goals which have cost them, whether they've been drawing a game to then lose. So that's happened at Coventry, that happened very deep into stoppage time. It happened at Blackburn. I think the Bristol City one was also quite late on. So they've been in drawing positions for all three of them and then ended up losing. So, like I said, that has been away from home. At home, where they've been predominantly the dominant side, that hasn't happened. But I guess it's something that will ebb and flow, and I'm sure it will come into their home form at some point. But that's again possibly natural. They are adjusting to what is a much more physically demanding league. There was some interesting sort of interview bits and pieces, maybe a month or so ago, where those things were highlighted, that they're running similar distances to what they were in League One, maybe a little bit more, but in fact they're actually running at like a faster pace over a longer distance. So it's more harder sprinting than what it was before. So it's a bit more intense, if you were. So I suppose that might be one. But otherwise, they have looked solid, and that's the sort of reassuring thing. They haven't looked like a team that's got, that's an obvious weak spot. But I think it would be the closing stages of games, I'd probably say.
And Liam, last question before I let you go. How are you viewing this game from an Oxford perspective? Like I said, these two teams are very close in the table. They both had pretty great starts to the season. I think both fan bases and both clubs are pretty buoyed by the fact that they are where they are. I think bookies kind of had both of our teams down in the lower third, if not behind, under that dotted line for various different reasons. Tuesday night under the lights at the Kassam. How are you viewing this from an Oxford perspective and just as a football fan in general?
I think based on the home form so far, and based on the fact that like Derby will when they're at home this season, Oxford have got to view this as 3 points. I think they'd be not stupid or naive not to, but I think they know that most of their points this season will come at home. So And that is no disrespect to Derby whatsoever, because I know when the tide turns and the game is at Derby, I know that's exactly what Derby would be thinking. So yeah, I think it has to be, if not point minimum, then it has to be sort of 3 points, especially because the game before against West Brom will arguably be a tougher game. And then I think there's a trip to Sunderland after the Derby game on the Saturday, and that is going to be, that will be a challenge. So yeah, I think the approach will be to a point minimum, but 3 points is the objective, and yeah, and then we will see what happens.
For sure. And just so you're aware, Liam, that Derby I don't think they picked up any points away from home. And it's starting to become a little bit of a thing. And so I think a lot of Derby fans are viewing this as a trip to go and making it not be a thing. So it'll be a very intriguing game. But Liam Rice, Oxford United reporter for the Oxford Mail. Liam, thank you so much for spending the last 25 minutes or so talking about the U's. I hope it's a good game. And I hope, we can catch up again when the fixtures turn around.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to be on.
We'll be back with another match preview next week.